This is the Terracotta Army. 8,000 warriors buried over 2,000 years ago. One of the greatest wonders of the world.
The Terracotta Army stands as one of the most remarkable archaeological discoveries ever made. Every year, millions of visitors peer into those vast underground excavation pits, gazing at endless rows of clay warriors, convinced they understand what lies before them. But they don't. Albert Lin has uncovered a hidden layer beneath the army that is, quite honestly, deeply disturbing. The deeper his scanning technology reached below the surface, the clearer it became that the emperor didn't simply construct a tomb for himself. He created an entire second kingdom above something far more sinister. Buried beneath are things that should never exist inside a burial complex, concealed chambers, unusual disruptions in the earth, and a story of betrayal that was locked away underground while those responsible were still alive to suffer its consequences. This is the secret the clay soldiers were designed to protect. They are not standing watch over the emperor. They are standing guard to ensure that whatever lies beneath them never reaches the light of day.
This is the first emperor's tomb. And it's at the center of what is thought to be the largest burial complex in the world.
A forbidden afterlife. Most people who visit the site focus entirely on the warriors themselves, nearly 8,000 individually crafted clay figures, each with its own unique face, arranged across enormous pits that extend much farther and deeper than most people realize. But the warriors are only the entrance. The entire complex stretches across thousands of acres. After studying its complete layout, researchers now believe the emperor wasn't merely preparing for death, he was constructing a full-scale replica of his empire beneath the ground. If the world above was ever destroyed, if his dynasty came to an end and his enemies claimed victory, his spirit would still inherit a complete civilization waiting below the surface. Perfect, everlasting, and entirely under his rule. That is why the site contains clay stables, bronze tools that remain functional after more than 2,000 years, and carefully sculpted animals made from the same fired clay as the soldiers. Clay birds, farming equipment, and every essential part of everyday life were recreated underground so the emperor would never be without anything in the afterlife.
The tomb actually covers a very large area. Only a few areas and surrounding the border part of the tomb complex have been excavated.
But there's a theory that goes well beyond simple preparation for death. Some researchers argue the emperor wasn't just planning his afterlife, he was trying to outrun death altogether. For decades, he chased an elixir of immortality, sending expedition after expedition across the known world, meeting with mystics and alchemists. Swallowing substances his advisors swore would keep him alive indefinitely.
It's quite extraordinary. Over 8,000 terracotta soldiers have been found there, along with 520 horses, 130 chariots, most of which are still buried.
This wasn't rumor or legend, it's documented fact. He genuinely believed death was a puzzle he could solve, and he had the full weight of an empire behind him to try. When those searches turned up nothing, he redirected all of that effort into the tomb itself. Some scholars now think the entire complex wasn't built as a resting place at all, it was built as a machine. A massive ritual engine meant to drag his soul back across the line between life and death. Every clay soldier, every channel of liquid mercury, every star painted onto the ceiling of the inner chamber was a working part of that machine, a route for his spirit to find its way home. It sounds like superstition until you notice the precision behind it. The soldiers aren't facing some random direction. They face east, toward the lands of the enemies he spent his life conquering. He wasn't resting in death. He was still positioned for the next battle. Nothing here was accidental, and the real shock came once high-resolution cameras looked past those clay faces into the darkness behind them. Getting an Albert Lin didn't approach this site like an ordinary visitor. He understood exactly what he was walking into long before he ever boarded a plane. Lin isn't the type of researcher who shows up with a shovel and a notepad. He works with equipment built to find things that were never meant to be found. Scanning tools originally designed to locate buried objects in war zones, instruments that can read the ground the way an X-ray reads a human body. His reputation is recognized internationally at the highest levels of the field, and he's worked inside some of the most sensitive archaeological sites on Earth. None of that fully prepared him for what the Chinese government had quietly been sitting on here for decades. Getting clearance to enter the site's restricted zones was nearly impossible. For decades, the most sensitive sections stayed under tight government control. Drones were banned from flying over the complex entirely. Every scan needed sign-off from the highest levels of oversight. Even Chinese researchers who'd spent decades working the site often didn't have the full picture of what sat beneath their feet. The information was split up deliberately, spread across different teams, so no one outside a small inner circle ever knew everything. Somehow, Lin secured permission to go where no outside investigator had ever been allowed. Exactly how he pulled that off has never been fully explained. From the moment his team arrived, the tension was immediate and physical. Uniformed officers tracked his every move. His equipment was inspected piece by piece before it was allowed inside. Every drone flight required its own separate approval. Every scan was run with someone standing right behind him, watching the readout as the data came through. As his crew set up their gear inside the pits, the air felt heavy in a way that had nothing to do with depth or temperature. Lin later said that standing at the center of the complex felt like being inside a place that was never built for the living, and that wasn't just a figure of speech. Very few people had ever stood exactly where he was standing, and even fewer had ever been allowed to point instruments at what lay underneath. He moved through chambers that had been sealed for over 2,000 years. Clay soldiers rose up on every side, some frozen mid-motion as if about to draw a weapon, others holding a stillness that felt even more unsettling than aggression. He passed carriages with wheels still intact, stables where clay horses stood mid-stride as though waiting for riders who would never arrive, bronze swords and spear tips still sharp enough to cause real harm today, and tools left mid-task, as if the worker had simply stepped away and never come back. Every pit was a frozen moment, a room where time had simply stopped and stayed that way, but Lin wasn't there for the artwork. He was there to find what the naked eye couldn't, what the scanners found his drones lifted off, carrying the most advanced scanning gear available. On the ground, his team swept radar equipment carefully across the floor, reading the earth dozens of feet below their boots. As he watched the silent rows of soldiers from above, a sense of unease crept over the team and only grew with each passing hour. The beauty of the sculptures almost seemed to be doing a job, pulling the eye upward and outward, keeping attention fixed on the surface and away from whatever sat underneath. This wasn't paranoia. It was pattern recognition. Something was waiting to be discovered, something the emperor had gone to enormous lengths to keep buried. The local community around the site has long considered it cursed, a reputation that predates its 1974 discovery by centuries. The farmers who first broke into that original pit said their lives were never the same afterward. Some lost their land to government seizure. Others lost their health under circumstances that were never properly explained. The story that's circulated ever since is simple. They opened something that was never meant to be opened, and that act left a mark on everyone who touched it. Lin, as a scientist, had to set that aside, but even a scientist carries something with him when he steps into a place where thousands of people met violent ends beneath layers of clay and silence. The technology Lin relied on is called ground-penetrating radar. It fires precise pulses of energy into the earth, and when those pulses hit something solid, a wall, a floor, a buried object, a mass of compacted material, they bounce back and form an image of what's hidden below, a picture built entirely out of echoes and shadows. When those images appeared on his screens, the team fell silent. Walls with no match in any existing architectural record, vertical shafts dropping more than 100 feet straight down, and clusters of shapes, thousands of small, tightly packed objects nobody could immediately identify. One theory is that these clusters are the emperor's personal belongings, everyday items from his life reproduced in materials built to outlast time, the kind of objects a man obsessed with eternity would want kept close. The other theory is much darker. Some researchers believe the scanners weren't picking up objects at all, but the remains of the emperor's actual court. Not clay stand-ins, but real people placed there to serve him in the afterlife the same way they'd served him in life. The deeper the equipment probed, the less the underground world looked like a planned complex, and the more it resembled one enormous chaotic burial ground, layer after layer of disturbed earth, deep shadows with no architectural explanation. Nothing on those screens matched what anyone had expected to find: the graves beneath the army for a long time. No aircraft had ever been allowed anywhere near this site. The airspace above it was essentially off-limits. Albert Lin changed that. He became the first person to fly scanning equipment directly over the emperor's burial complex and view it from above. From that height, the true scale of the underground world finally came into focus in a way that decades of ground-level work never could. He used LiDAR, a laser-based imaging tool that cuts through vegetation and surface soil to map buried structures with real precision. What it revealed beneath the pits the public already knows about was a vast, sprawling web of hidden structures, buried walls stretching far past known boundaries, collapsed chambers absent from any existing map, and areas where large numbers of people appeared to have been placed into the ground at the same time. Some of these areas showed thermal signatures consistent with ancient fires, evidence of intense heat absorbed into the ground itself and preserved there for 2,000 years. Then the team hit the section that stopped everyone cold. Deep beneath the feet of the clay soldiers, the scans showed clusters of irregular, disturbed holes in the earth, too chaotic to be intentional construction, too organized to be natural geology. The pattern was one forensic archaeologists recognized instantly: mass graves. The soil in those spots had been damaged in a very specific way, compressed and cracked in patterns consistent with a sudden, enormous force, not the slow, even settling of time and earth, but the violent, concentrated impact of something catastrophic. Fracture lines ran through the soil layers, with scattered, dense shapes matching human remains. Lin stared at the readout and didn't say anything for a long time. He'd seen difficult data before. This was different. What lies beneath the clay army isn't just a palace for a dead ruler. It's a graveyard, and not one built for people who were honored. Historical records say 700,000 people were conscripted to build this complex. 700,000. Construction stretched across decades. People traveled in from all over China and never made it home. Historians long assumed they were simply released once the work wrapped up, sent back to their villages and fields. The scan data tells a different story. If even a fraction of those workers were sealed inside once construction finished, the Terracotta Army is sitting on top of one of the largest mass burial sites in human history. The theory that circulated for centuries is that the emperor used the construction project itself as a tool for eliminating threats, political rivals, dissidents, anyone who knew too much or had seen too much, assigned to labor sites under the guise of national service, then quietly made sure they never left once their usefulness ran out. The radar data makes that theory hard to dismiss. The soil disturbance patterns match what forensic geologists call struggle layers, earth churned up by bodies in motion. The tunnels appear to have been sealed from the outside while people were still trapped inside. And in the lower levels, the scans picked up signatures matching metal components, possible remnants of the mechanical crossbow traps described in ancient texts. Devices built to fire automatically on anyone entering the sealed passages without permission. Most researchers assumed the wooden triggers would have rotted away over 2 millennia. The bronze parts are a different story entirely. The LiDAR also picked up something no previous study had ever found: a pyramid-shaped mound of tightly packed earth buried directly beneath the main structure. Hidden so completely, it's invisible from the surface. A secret tucked inside another secret. Whatever the emperor considered most important was buried under everything else, sealed off by layer after layer of stone, soil, clay soldiers, and the bodies of the very people who built it all. Those perfect rows of warriors above weren't arranged for beauty or ceremony, they were arranged as a seal. What they were covering up wasn't glory. It was the real cost of building an empire meant to last forever. The prince who died in the dark B near the center of the scan, the team spotted something that didn't fit the surrounding pattern. Beneath the organized layout of the known chambers sat a single isolated void, older than everything around it, dug noticeably deeper. As though whoever put it there wanted it hidden beneath everything else, unreachable, invisible, forgotten on purpose. Inside was a single skeleton. This person hadn't been discarded like the others. The bones had been arranged with clear care. They belonged to a young man, probably in his early 20s. The objects buried alongside him weren't the possessions of a laborer or a prisoner. They were expensive, high-status items, the kind carried only by someone born into serious power. But what silenced the room was what the imaging found inside the skull, a bronze arrowhead lodged deep in the bone. This wasn't an accident, and it wasn't leftover debris from some nearby battle. It was an execution, precise, deliberate, carried out on someone buried separately, carefully, in a spot engineered specifically so no one would ever find him. How he died was answered within seconds. Who he was took much longer, and the answer was disturbing. Ancient records from this period document the sons of the first emperor, princes raised in extraordinary privilege inside a court where power and paranoia went hand in hand. And trust was something no one could safely give to anyone else. Several of those princes simply vanish from the historical record without explanation. Their names appear in documents and then just stop. No account of their deaths, no record of exile or disgrace, only silence where a life used to be, as if the record itself had been ordered to forget them. As researchers piece together the details of this burial, its position relative to the central mound, the quality of the grave goods, the depth, the extraordinary lengths taken to hide it, a picture formed that nobody in the room wanted to accept. This wasn't a laborer. This wasn't an ordinary prisoner. This young man may have been one of the emperor's own sons, killed not by an outside enemy, but on the orders of someone in his own bloodline. The chamber itself only reinforced the horror. It wasn't shaped like a tomb, its dimensions matched a holding cell. The way the skeleton was positioned suggests the young man may have been kept alive underground for weeks or months before the end came. Breathing. Silent. Erased from the world above, while still very much alive in the world below. The stress markers in the bones were consistent with prolonged confinement under harsh conditions. There's a theory about who gave the order. The emperor's successor was his second son, who seized power immediately after his father's death. Historians have long suspected his rise involved systematically eliminating every sibling who could have challenged his claim. Not one or two rivals, but all of them. The scans turned up several more voids matching this prince's chamber, spaced out around the main mound, same shape, same depth, same deliberate placement below everything else. An entire generation of royal children wiped out and buried alongside the workers and prisoners who built their father's tomb. To the man who took the throne, they were all equally dangerous. They were all secrets, and in the world the first emperor built, secrets belonged underground. The scrolls inside sealed chambers near the emperor's main burial site. Researchers found something they never expected to still exist after 2,000 years. Bamboo scrolls. Preserving them meant working inside a controlled environment where temperature and humidity were held within razor-thin tolerances. The material was that fragile. A few minutes of wrong conditions could have destroyed them for good. Opening them took weeks, not days. What the texts contained, once they were finally read, wasn't a list of accomplishments. It wasn't a monument to the emperor's legacy. To the historians reading it, it felt more like a record of crimes. Line after line described a society ruled by fear rather than law. One document recorded an imperial order to bury 460 scholars and intellectuals alive, not execute them quickly, bury them alive, for the crime of holding philosophical and historical ideas the emperor hadn't approved. Ideas that suggested there might be other ways to organize the world. That his power wasn't the only kind that existed. Other scrolls documented the mass burning of books across China. Not just political texts, but history, philosophy, science, and medical knowledge. A deliberate effort to destroy any recorded thought that might give someone a foundation for questioning the emperor's absolute authority. Some of the most disturbing documents were confessions, signed by the very engineers, builders, and craftsmen who worked on the tomb. Reading the charges against them is genuinely uncomfortable. Some accused of harboring critical thoughts about the emperor's methods, others of working too slowly, others simply for associating with someone who'd already been accused of something. The chain of blame stretched outward endlessly, with no logical stopping point. The confessions were taken, filed away, and the people who signed them joined the thousands already buried beneath the clay. Everyone on that construction site was being watched. Every action was judged. Every relationship was a liability waiting to happen. One wrong word, one hesitation, one accusation from a coworker looking to save himself, and you went from working on the foundation to becoming part of it. As historians read those texts aloud inside the complex, Lin stood quietly and watched the clay soldiers. He said afterward that in that moment they changed in front of him. They stopped being remarkable works of art. They stopped representing military strength or imperial ambition or the skill of ancient craftsmen. They became what they'd always really been, a permanent garrison standing guard over a place built on suffering and forced silence, making sure that suffering stayed buried. The scrolls also went into far more detail about the emperor's obsession with immortality than earlier historical accounts had ever captured. He sent fleets carrying thousands of young men and women to search for a legendary island at the edge of the world, where a death-defeating elixir was said to be guarded by immortals. None of those ships ever came back. The most unsettling explanation is that they weren't lost at sea at all. Some historians believe the emperor made sure they never returned, because coming back empty-handed would mean standing before the court and admitting, publicly, that the emperor was just a mortal man who would age, weaken, and die like everyone else. The vanished ships may have been silenced for the exact same reason everything else in this story was silenced. Some passages in the scrolls still resist full translation. Certain sections appear to describe a process for bringing the clay figures to life, animating the army through breath and intention. Whether this was meant literally or as symbolic ritual language is still debated among scholars, but one thing it confirms without question, the emperor's belief in the mechanics of the supernatural was completely genuine. He wasn't performing ceremony for his subjects' benefit. He believed that at the right moment, the clay army would rise. The scrolls also describe something buried beneath the main chamber that no modern excavation has ever reached, a room filled with gold and jewels on a scale the ancient texts struggle to fully capture. The scans have detected a massive hollow space, roughly 3 stories tall, sitting directly beneath the central palace floor. It appears to be real. It appears to match the description. But the scrolls carry a warning attached to it: the treasure is bathed in the poison of the stars. That phrase almost certainly refers to Mercury. And Mercury is where this story reaches its final, most dangerous chapter. The poison guarding everything at the very center of the entire complex sits a location no one has ever opened. Not an archaeologist, not a government official, not a researcher at any level of authorization. No one. The main tomb of China's first emperor has stayed sealed for over 2,000 years, and it remains sealed today, not because no one wants to open it, but because people are afraid of what happens if they do. Soil samples taken from around the central mound don't show mildly elevated mercury levels. They show concentrations hundreds of times higher than anything found in nature. Ancient records describe the emperor's architects engineering rivers of liquid mercury to flow continuously through a scale model of his palace inside the burial chamber, a miniature empire in silver, running endlessly beneath the earth, the palace above recreated in permanent miniature below. For a long time, those accounts were dismissed as legend, exaggeration, the kind of tale that grows bigger with every retelling. The soil readings confirm the core of the story isn't exaggeration at all. It's documented fact. If the main chamber were open today, the pressurized atmosphere that's been building inside it for 2,000 years would vent outward instantly. Mercury vapor at the concentration suggested by this soil data is acutely toxic. Lethal exposure can happen within minutes at levels far lower than what's indicated here. What could start as the most significant archaeological excavation in modern history could turn into a mass casualty event before anyone had time to react. And that's not the only danger. Back in the 1980s, researchers opened a smaller subsidiary pit for the first time and watched the paint on the clay soldiers, colors perfectly preserved for over 2,000 years, begin peeling away within seconds of hitting open air. The sudden change in pressure and humidity triggered an irreversible chemical reaction. Colors that had survived 2 millennia vanished before anyone could do anything to stop it. If the emperor's main chamber contains wooden structures, silk fabric, or painted surfaces, opening the tomb could destroy the very history it holds. Discovery and destruction would happen in the same instant. Lin's scans of the central structure only deepened the mystery. The data lines up with ancient records about what's inside the sealed chamber, but one thing is unmistakably clear. The emperor built this place to stay sealed forever. The mercury, the mechanical traps, the extreme depth, the layers of burial, all of it was engineered to keep future generations out. He knew someone would eventually try to get in. So far, the world has honored that design, not out of admiration for the emperor, but because researchers understand exactly what happens if a chamber that was never meant to be disturbed gets disturbed anyway. The Terracotta Army isn't just a monument to power or loyalty. It's a lid. Beneath thousands of clay soldiers lie the workers who died where they stood. Political enemies erased from history, scholars executed for their ideas, and princes killed to secure the emperor's throne. 8,000 warriors still stand in perfect formation, facing east, guarding secrets that were never meant to have witnesses. Albert Lin walked into this site as a scientist and walked out with evidence confirming what ancient records had long hinted at. One of the world's greatest archaeological wonders might also be one of history's largest crime scenes. The real question isn't whether something even more terrifying than mercury and ancient traps is waiting inside that final chamber. It's whether we're actually ready to find out. Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this story changed the way you look at history, hit like and subscribe, because some of humanity's biggest secrets may still be buried underground. Thanks for watching.